Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Once again, I have to say that with North Korea in the news, calling it the DMZ is interesting. But welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
You're uncomfortable with the name now. You feel like are you gonna be attacked as like a North Korean sympathizer?
No, it's just interesting. It's just sort of ironic that we named, Anyway, we've talked about it before. The DMZ is. I'm in New York. I'm in New York today, so I'm not in Southern DMZ.
Or you're across enemy lines.
I am, yeah, across the DMZ.
You are a full blown creature of the coastal elite now. I mean, you should really you should just give it up. Change uniforms. Admit what tribe you are part of now.
Oh man, never. No, just when I think that like the unhinged right is worse, I get attacked by the left. This week, 4th of July weekend, I'm going to paraphrase my tweet, but it was the most innocuous and ironic tweet you could send. I said, paraphrasing, what we need right now is to come together. What America needs right now is to come together, but we keep electing politicians that rip us apart. And for that, I was inundated by tweets over the 4th of July holiday from leftists, many of which were calling me a racist for saying that. For saying what we need to do, what America needs is to come together, but we keep electing politicians that rip us apart. I was called a racist for that. So I don't think I'm going to be changing uniforms anytime soon because of the. Well, I just think and I'm writing something right now about college campuses and the whole thing about like just default calling people a racist and shutting down even speech that's like so. Like, how could anyone disagree with that statement? And yet, many people did.
But of course, you're not defining the left based on a handful of people on Twitter and 18-year-olds, which I never see conservatism defined by 18-year-old conservatives. We define conservatism by what conservative
no, but some of these
say.
people were well-known adults, and some of them I'm sure were 18-year-olds in pajamas, but
we're talking about college campuses. We tend to do.
Oh, I see.
There's this trend of like defining the heart of the left by college campus culture. I'm not defining.
I'm doing this story now where this young woman was attacked, not physically attacked, but attacked rhetorically, doxxed, and very much intimidated. And the administrators, like multiple adults at her college, University of Minnesota, went on the record basically calling. She was the chairman of the college Republicans, calling them racist and xenophobes. These are not kids. These are radical professors on the campuses.
So, am I going to define conservatism by tiny slices of conservative? I mean, at this point,
that's why I didn't say liberals. I said the left, and I think that's a distinction. I think that
the
right. I attack the right
broadly,
but I attacked the right at the start of this show. I think I've tried to be like we've all been guilty of this, but I've tried to be a little more precise about calling people like me conservatives and calling other people the right or the alt-right, and I'm doing the same with the left. I think that liberals I like you. It's the left. The left.
Well, the left's over. I mean, if you said that, campus left, which I still think is kind of imprecise, it would be a little bit more narrow. Because there's still diversity of opinion within college campuses. It's not this monolithic singular organization from people on every single campus. But I feel like the trend. I should say trend because it's been happening for decades.
You've been fighting these people in Oberlin.
We were having these PC debates in the early '90s. People are treating it now as some sort of like sudden phenomena. This is very long standing. There is a certain campus culture that fosters. There are obviously examples of extreme behavior on college campuses because they're not fully adult. They are teenagers. They're experimenting with thought and with politics.
But they're experimenting with shutting down thought and free speech.
Well, I mean, there are examples of that on left and right.
Many examples, but I think that they're also
doesn't translate into how they're going to function as adults. But people treat it as if like that is where like liberalism, progressivism are forged, and therefore we need to analyze it as the heart of the ideology, and not. This is what people do when they're kids. And
Bill, I've
look into what adults do.
About this in my 10-year career, I've written 2 columns about this. So I'm not obsessed with it.
Well, not you, but plenty of other people are.
Yeah, but I would say I think that a sort of an underrated part of this is what it's doing to radicalize young conservatives and turn them into alt-righters. I mean,
there are definitely people who. I feel are conservatives solely because some liberal irritated them in college and they haven't gotten over it.
I agree.
And you know, my experience is I was the odd man out at Oberlin. I was constantly fighting the quote unquote anti-PC fight in college, but I didn't let that like define my entire political outlook for the rest of my life. I didn't say there were some irritating leftists in Oberlin, so I'm going to be anti-gay. I'm going to be anti-abortion. It wouldn't make any sense. Yet I see people doing that.
Yes, I agree. So anyway, I don't know how we got on the topic. No, I don't even know. I remember a couple.
Well, you're writing about this. This is your fault.
No, but there's something led us down this path.
Why was that?
You asked me how my 4th was.
Yeah.
It was good except for the tweets.
Your tweet started this.
It was good except for the tweets. How about you? You went camping, right?
I went camping like a real American to a family campground in Rhode Island, Burlingame State Park, which was a very heavily populated campground. If you like peace and quiet at 11 o'clock at night, it is not the campground for you. But it was teeming with people from all nationalities. I think a lot of folks from big cities bring their families up there for some nature. We were right by a lake. We were near Ocean Beach. We grilled burgers and dogs and pancakes, and kids ate lots of junk, and that's what America's all about.
I was just disappointed you weren't with our friend David Petrusha up in Vermont celebrating the birth of Calvin Coolidge, who was born on the 4th of July.
That's true. I've yet to experience a Plymouth Notch, Vermont July 4th in the home of Coolidge. Of course, I'm in Northampton where Coolidge spent his adult years. So I like to say there's a rivalry between Plymouth Notch and Northampton about ownership of Coolidge, but the truth is I think only Plymouth Notch cares. But
so far, that's going to change, Bill.
Well, I'm not sure I mentioned on air or not, I have recently joined the Coolidge Advisory Committee of the Calvin Coolidge Library, which is here in Northampton, not in Plymouth Notch. Plymouth Notch is where Coolidge was born. And where he was sworn in as president because he was vacationing at his family homestead when Warren Harding died. And if you do go up to Plymouth Notch, there's a very elaborate Coolidge museum, complete with a Calvin Coolidge hologram. Outside of the hologram, it's basically living like it was in the late 19th century.
Aside from the hologram, everything's traditional.
Right. So you see, the candy store is like it was. You see, the room where he was sworn in like it was, and all that kind of thing.
I saw you reading. You were reading on this fake. I saw a picture of you and somebody else, like on a lawn chair reading. What history were you?
Well, I'm still in the midst of. I'm trying to do the presidents in succession. Although I started from Teddy Roosevelt through Truman, and I started with Roosevelt because I was trying to actually learn more about Coolidge. I was trying to kind of get the political climate that Coolidge came up in, and then I just kind of kept going. And then when I got up to Eisenhower, I was having a hard time finding a good Eisenhower book. And so I said, why don't I go back to Washington? And I got stuck on Jefferson for a long time because I was reading a Dumas Malone Jefferson book, which is a real tough read. And I could barely do it. And I picked if I got past that, I picked up. I got through James Madison, so I was reading James Monroe, The Quest for National Identity on the camping trip, which I got through. I got through the presidential chapters. I didn't care so much about his early life. And
speaking of Monroe, by the way, I tweeted out. I was surprised how many people did not realize that Adams and Jefferson died on the same day, 4th of July, 50 years after the signing of the Declaration. I got a surprise on Twitter. It's a positive Twitter story. People were learning this, and then someone reminded me that Monroe died on the 4th of July 5 years later. And then I'm reading this terrific book, which is not challenging. It's an easy read. Richard Brookhiser's book on Lincoln called Founder's Son. And I ran across something in there that Zachary Taylor died because of something he ate on the 4th of July, at a 4th of July party. There's a lot of 4th of July tie-ins today.
So it's a dark, dark day.
Yeah, but Monroe, I don't think I knew that about Monroe, or if I did, I'd forgotten it, that he also died on the 4th of July.
Well, yeah, I picked up this book, Monroe, Quest for National Identity, because a fantastic site called bestpresidentialbios.com, which is written by one guy who's a pilot. And he is literally, he's way ahead of me. He's reading not just, a single book on every president. He's reading multiple books on every president in succession. Wow. And then doing blog posts on each book. And then he does an overview. Here are the 5 books I read about Monroe. Here is the most thorough. Here's the most fun read. So as I've been going through and trying to pick which one am I going to read, I've leaned on.
How'd you find this? How'd you find this guy?
Just googling around, but and he's a pilot, and so he sits on the tarmac for long stretches, and he spends his time on the tarmac reading presidential books. That's
good for him.
So bestpresidentialbios.com, fantastic site. So after I got through the Monroe book, so we were camping with a friend's family. And their 10-year-old daughter was like, "What you reading?" And I was like, "Well, I'm reading about President James Monroe." "Who's that?" "Well, he's the 5th president." "Oh, can I see?" And so after I finished Monroe, I gave her my Monroe book, and I also brought my John Quincy Adams book, Militant Spirit, which is by James Traub. Came out.
This is a fairly new book,
I think it's
right?
a fairly new one.
Been a couple years.
And my sense is there's a bit of like a John Quincy Adams boomlet going on. Jackson's on the decline, and Quincy Adams is on the uptake. Jackson no longer is the paragon of common man democracy. He's the racist
national populism,
right? Obviously in Trump world, Jackson is restored, but on the left, Jackson is derided. And Quincy Adams was a diehard abolitionist, particularly in his later stage of his career, and so he's getting a bit of a fresh look. So. Militant Spirit, I think, covers his whole life story, because his life story is quite dramatic, and he kept a diary from a very, very young age, so we actually know a lot about.
And so did his wife. His wife kept a very good diary.
There's a book about her that came out recently called Louisa, which I've not read, but I've heard good things about.
Yeah, I read some of it, and I interviewed the author. Who has the same name for my podcast.
Well, the start of Militant Spirit points out that John Quincy Adams frightened his children and exasperated his wife throughout his life. So not necessarily a paragon of warmth.
I don't think he was. It also suggests he may have visited ladies of the night at some point in his life early on.
I haven't gone very far. And I mean, so far I'm up to his teenage years. And they're saying that he was a rectitude of morality, that he was not tempted by the indulgences of Europe when he was there in Paris and other.
He fell in love. He fell in love with a woman, and his mom shut it down. Wouldn't let them marry, and apparently that had a long impact on him. It's sort of that was his true love, and he was not, and that I think that had a big impact.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
That's a big book. While we're talking about this kind of stuff, we should, before we move on to something else, we should plug our friend Carl Cannon.
Yeah.
The great Carl Cannon from Real Clear Politics.
Washington bureau chief, Real Clear Politics.
And he has a book. He does this great daily email newsletter that is full of stuff that you would love, Bill. I mean, it's these.
I get it. I get it every day.
And he's got a book out.
So his book is On This Date. So he does these little history, these little short history stories in the morning email, which also rounds up, what's above the fold at realclearpolitics.com. And so he's compiled it into a book called On This Date. Although, as I just heard him say in an interview, it wasn't nearly as simple as just cutting and pasting all of his morning notes. He had to do a lot of extra work to make it into a complete book. And so that I think it drops July 25th, but you can already pre-order it on Amazon, and you can check out the interview he did on Real Clear Politics in their Changing Lanes video series.
On This Date is the name of the book. On This Date, and I would, having read the emails and knowing Carl, I would highly recommend picking that up if you like the kind of stuff that Bill, this sort of historical nuggets that you may or may not know.
And, Carl runs circles around me, so definitely you should get that book.
Carl's also a master at debunking bogus quotes. If you want to know if Edmund Burke really said all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, just email Carl and he can tell you pretty quickly. By the way, it's apocryphal.
Well, I was in a bit of a news hole on my camping trip because I ran out of data on my phone, so I wasn't checking it every 5 minutes, which is good for reading. But I did catch up, and apparently your network, CNN, was body slammed by the president in a video. And you claim to not be a creature of the liberal media elite, but we all know who's signing your paychecks these days. Trump's going after your people, and CNN is responding in kind. Do you think that if you read media publications, the narrative is our sad president is tweeting out disturbing videos attacking the media. I'm sure in Trump Nation, these are being lauded as our president is sticking it to the coastal elite. So whose side are you on?
Well, first I'll start with the caveat, the disclaimer. As you noted, I'm paid by CNN, so obviously I'm biased. Also, my opinions do not represent CNN. It's strictly my opinions here. So look, I think in the context is what's interesting of this. We are in a context where you have people talking about the dangers of rhetoric, and we had a guy running for Congress, quote unquote body slam a journalist, a month ago, and a few weeks ago we had a member of Congress who was shot, who was actually, I guess, still in the hospital, and I think his condition was recently downgraded. So it's a very serious thing, and with the context being that rhetoric, that we have to be careful about political rhetoric and imagery. Trump does this. And I think it's really kind of in the eye of the beholder. It could be perceived as fun and just a joke, or it could be perceived as something that's dangerous and that could inspire people to target, journalists. So, I think it's weird. First of all, it's just obviously bizarre having a president do it. But the existence of the video in and of itself, I think you could argue either of those two things. But it also raised but then of course CNN found out the person who created the meme on Reddit, and did not disclose his identity, but there was a line in there that said, we reserve the right, later on, if he continues this kind of behavior, to revisit like whether or not to disclose his identity.
It didn't quite. I don't know if it quite made it conditional. I mean, there's a strong inference that we didn't release identity because he apologized and said he wasn't going to do this again. We reserve the right to change this decision. It didn't quite say he had to do X, Y, and Z for it not to happen, but maybe people interpreted it as like, you better be on good behavior or else we're going to reveal your identity.
And people saw it, and you have to keep in mind that some of the people who are pushing this have an axe to grind and an agenda. But some people said that it was blackmail, and it was like this huge corporation threatening to quote unquote dox an individual. And this is where I think that it gets really interesting and really debatable. And it raises all sorts of interesting questions, I think. A video, let's say you've got thousands of Twitter followers or followers on Reddit or fans or whatever, and you create a video that goes viral. Is there an expectation that your identity should be kept quiet? I also think there was a lot of conflation with doxing, which is my understanding of doxing is not reporting somebody's identity, but is releasing like their cell phone information, their address. Now, you could obviously argue that once you release the identity, somebody else could dig that information up. But anyway, I think there were a lot of sort of subplots to this story that are interesting. And I'll just throw it to you, Bill. Obviously, we all want to preserve parts of our private life and our personal life, but is there an expectation that you should be able to have an anonymous, handle on Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or whatever? Facebook's harder, but is there an assumption that you should be able to like basically talk shit about people and create these sort of memes, and that you should never, if they become newsworthy, and this clearly is, that you should have a presumption of being able to protect that identity?
Well, there's freedom of the press. There is no explicit right to not have your name be in the press for actions that you take. So just from a strict technical standpoint, there's nothing preventing the media from reporting on the actions of individuals. Period. Now, there are laws against harassment, and if something the media does leads to others harassing, that's not the media's fault. That's the fault of the harasser. And their actions are subject to reporting as well as education. So I don't think CNN is necessarily out of line in following a story. I think there is a question whether, the news value of Trump tweeting out this video is that the president is demonizing the media. There's not a whole lot of news value in knowing which individual created the original video. I get that there's a degree of interest in, is this coming up through white supremacist type sites, and this guy was doing a lot of racist posting on Reddit, and so it's of some note that you can connect those dots. Knowing who the exact person was doesn't really add too much to my individual understanding of Trump's involvement in the video. And you could also point out that just because this video kind of went through the intertubes doesn't necessarily mean that makes Trump a racist. I plenty of other evidence I can point to make that case, but not this one video. There's a question whether are him or his people combing alt-right racist sites for material,
Right.
and therefore it's worth exploring that stuff. So I can see lesser, sort of less major sites like CNN ferrying out that kind of individual information on people because it gets clicks. It's definitely cheap clickbait. I wouldn't think if I was the editor of CNN, I would say this is not really the best use of our time. We're a major international news organization. We don't have to chase clicks for click's sake. Let's follow the story so in far as it pertains to Trump. I don't really think there's a lot of value in going beyond that. That's not the mentality that they had, and but I don't think they are violating ethics in doing it. But I do question a little bit of the news value.
Well, I do think there's a thing where, and this isn't about like revenge or anything like that, but there's a thing where like, because there's so many people, there's so much competition in journalism now, and there's so much space to fill, that you have people like, I forget the outlet, but there was an outlet that like tracked down James Comey's Twitter feed.
Yeah. Do
you remember that?
I do.
And they were like really heralded with this detective work. Mm-hmm. And they were really celebrated for tracking, But if you think of it, like we didn't really learn anything from it. Like he was like following a couple people,
family members.
There was like really no news value of it,
right?
But it made a big splash, and whoever it was that did this was really heralded. Like, wow, the way they put it together, pieced it together, the detective work. Again, like it didn't. I don't think it advanced anything. I don't think we learned anything. I don't think it contributed to the debate or the discussion.
It was a fun story. It's a fun story. People like to click and share. Which, look, I'm sympathetic to the dire state of media. Media is under enormous financial pressure. People are losing jobs. Publications are going under. Everybody is desperate to find something to keep them afloat. And this is not the first age of media where publications go for the lowest common denominator in order to get people to buy their product. We've always had tabloid media in America, going back to the founding. So this is just
I don't even think this is tabloid though. I think this is more like meta. It's like it's not tabloid. It's not salacious. I don't think. I think it's more like meta. Like, who really needs to know this? Why do we really need to know that? But
it's a popular sense of, if people are going to buy it, we're going to do it. We're giving the people what they want. We're going to pursue James Comey's Twitter feed. Hey, we did it and it got a lot of clicks. Let's do more stuff like that. It's less of the more elitist. We're going to give the people what they need to know. This is more, we're going to give the people what they want, or at least try to figure out what they want because they need to survive. And that's a hard place for media to be in. And because they're in a precarious state, because they're stretched thin, because they're grasping at straws to get readership, they're going to make mistakes. People, you're humans, you're going to make mistakes. They're under this kind of pressure environment, they're going to make mistakes. I mean, I don't think, I'm not calling what happened here a mistake, but the other CNN issue where they had that piece about Anthony Scaramucci, which they decided didn't hold water, and then they fired three people who were not like, not interns. These are these were veteran journalists with long records of integrity and credibility. And CNN just whacked them, saying we can't tolerate this. We're under attack from Trump and attack from his minions. We have to have zero tolerance for this. That's a real tough environment for the media to be in, where they're expected to be perfect with fewer and fewer resources and harder and harder time to get readership.
I would say a couple more things about this story. I was surprised how many people who I considered to be not Trump fans and not alt-righters or Trumpers turned against CNN on this and saw it as like, made a martyr out of this guy who really, it's a hell of a martyr to have. They turned him into a martyr, and it just, I think it really illustrates the anger at mainstream media that's been in conservative circles for decades. That I think that I was surprised, because from my standpoint, the media is super important to hold powerful people accountable, to preserve our freedoms. And even though I do agree that media bias certainly exists, and that all media people do sometimes make mistakes, I'm more concerned about efforts to destroy that institution and to seize all mistakes and undermine their credibility. Like I'm concerned about both. Like I'm concerned about media bias, but I'm also concerned about authoritarianism. But I'm more concerned about authoritarianism as a bigger problem. But I've been surprised by people that I thought of as sort of thoughtful mainstream conservatives who very quickly sort of turned this guy into a martyr and turned on the media.
Well, this is all part of the level of polarization that we're under right now, where most everyone's picked a side, and if it's good for my side, who cares about intellectual consistency or principle or what have you? I mean, it's been a hallmark of the online right for a long time to single out random people on the left and engage in harassment campaigns. I never heard a lot of conservative complaining from, and I'm not pointing a finger at you or anything, but it was like, oh no, people on the right, we shouldn't be picking at random people for harassment. That's really, that offends my sensibilities. Now,
can you give me an example of what you mean, like a random person?
You know, there's a case from a while back. I just want to make sure I get my my names right. Excuse me for.
Well, while you're looking at that, I'll bring up the CNN reporter who sort of who tracked down the Reddit guy. Also, I did the reporting on the Justine Sacco story.
Yeah.
From years ago, and there's a lot of people sort of in the alt-right making connections between those two. They're sort of turning Justine Sacco. Is it her name, Justine? Whatever.
I'm not sure.
Do you remember the Sacco story? She was like a liberal, I think public affairs or PR person who tweeted something, got on like a 14-hour flight to South Africa.
Right.
And emerged like having no idea that the world had done nothing but obsess about her and basically criticize her for 14 hours.
Oh, here's the story I was thinking of. This
Okay.
is 2007. So Bush was president. There was a fight in Congress about the state children's health insurance program. So this is the New York Times story from the time. When Democrats enlisted 12-year-old Graham Frost, who along with a younger sister relied on the program for treatment of severe brain injury suffered in a car crash, to give the response to Bush's weekly radio address on September 29th, Republican opponents quickly accused him of exploiting the boy to score political points. In recent days, Graham and his family have been attacked by conservative bloggers and other critics of the Democrats' plan. They scrutinized the family's income and assets, even alleged the counters in their kitchen to be granite, and declared the Frost did not seem needy enough for government benefits. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that was happening, I think still does happen. That
happens on both sides. Remember, Joe the plumber wasn't really a plumber. The fisherman who got Elian Gonzalez out of, who sort of pulled him out of the water, wasn't really a fisherman.
I can give you a local case. I don't want to say the blogger's name because I don't want to give him the traffic, but there's a conservative blogger here in Massachusetts who basically spends his time, attacking folks locally. And we had a flap here about in Northampton about a program where the police were present in the schools in kind of a fun, lighthearted way. there are some families that thought that the police presence was inappropriate. It was making their children uncomfortable. These are people with who had children of color or immigrant families, and the blogger was attacking individual people for I think in one case when it wasn't even like really involved, I didn't even get his facts straight, but he was organizing harassment campaigns for individual people in the community. I mean, so this wasn't a national. I mean, the police then became.
I would imagine that that's very legally fraught. I mean, I don't know if a blogger is protected as a journalist or something, but that becomes pretty dicey.
Why can't I write online about someone in my neighborhood? Why is that not news? This is a news story. I mean, I'm sure I don't know if he was actually violating a law, but what happens is, this is the same thing with CNN. You put up a guy's name.
Right.
The CNN didn't actually do it. You put up the guy's name.
That's my point. Is that this becomes very right? This becomes a very this is a new thing that we're dealing with because Reddit didn't used to exist. Memes didn't, video, Twitter didn't used to. Like, we're really wrestling, and it's like everyone's having their 15 minutes of fame. Are you still a rando when you are, have tens of, somebody was pointing out on Twitter the other day that, if you've got 40,000 Twitter followers, then you're more influential than a lot of local newspapers, arguably.
Right.
So do you still deserve to be protected as anonymously? But here's the other thing, Bill. You have a situation where the original video itself was, the danger was that it could have inspired some sort of violence against journalists. And now you've got a situation where the alt-right is threatening retribution again. So they say that this was an attempt to blackmail and dox one of their people, and now they're threatening retribution against reporters. And so this could become a very dangerous and ugly thing. Not that it isn't already.
Let me shift gears just slightly. There's a tweet by Dave Weigel at the Washington Post on the subject today that said, unpopular take, we in media need to ignore some of these Trump attacks on the press. The strategy is to start dumb fights, not ban us.
Yeah.
I think that's very technically right. I mean, no one's going to ban the media anytime soon, but there's obviously a attempt to discredit the media and discredit reporting on Trump. But do you agree with that notion that, hey, Trump's baiting us all here?
Totally. Look, what's happening to the media is exactly what happened to the Republican primary field. If you don't say anything, then you're basically a wimp and you're letting Trump define you. And if you go on the attack, then you're Marco Rubio and then you're lowering yourself to his standards. And, Eric Erickson at the Resurgent said basically there's two ways that Trump corrupts people. One is by having them acquiesce to him, and the other is by having them become so mad at him that they lower themselves and act like him. So it's very hard, right? And it could be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. 5 years from now, if we look back and the media is a shell of what it used to be, if we have sort of like what's happening in Turkey happen here, we're going to say, why didn't we fight harder? Why did we sit back and let him do this to us? We should have fought back. The First Amendment is obviously worth the fighting for, right? But then you could also second guess and say, wait a second, this is what he wants. He wants us to fight back. He wants to distract, and he wants to galvanize public opinion against us, and we should just ignore it. You're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And it's exactly the situation that Republican, presidential candidates were in the primaries against Trump. They were damned if they did, damned if they didn't.
I generally agree, and it wouldn't make sense to sort of let attack after attack go unanswered. But the question becomes what is the best way to fight back? If it's just the knee-jerk response and the tit for tat response, all you're doing is just feeding the polarization that already exists. You're not convincing anyone in Trump Nation that the media really is fair and balanced and not fake news. And not to say that I have the magic answer to solve that puzzle. But some of the responses, I suspect, are the tit for tat is good for both sides. We get clicks when we do tit for tat, so why not?
Well, I do know that Morning Joe, their ratings went up.
Right.
After that fight, the whole Mika Brzezinski.
Anyone that gets attacked by Trump, immediately gets an extra 15 minutes in the spotlight, and their stature is raised. So there's a bit of an everybody wins mentality. I mean, it may decay the body politic and the fabric of democracy, but on an individual level, everyone's profile is being raised.
To paraphrase Les Moonves.
So, if the concern is how do we protect the integrity of the media, it might require taking a breath and thinking about, okay, when he does these things, what is the best way to respond, and not what is just the quickest way to respond.
Yes, well, I think this is a really interesting story with many nuances, and I don't think it's going to be going away anytime soon. I mean, the specifics of this story will, but the larger story about the state of journalism and attempts to discredit journalism and journalists. And I mean, look, the media is liberally biased. That's the problem. The problem is
your fault.
Well, okay, here's when I see it, right? So when Trump does something like send out a provocative, stupid tweet, everybody criticizes him, and I think that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. It should be criticized. And then he gives a great speech in Warsaw, and half the pundits, more than half, a lot of the pundits are like saying it's tired, uninspired, basically panning it. And I'm thinking, well, they're never going to give him credit. So I understand the frustration.
What happened after?
I understand the frustration if you're a conservative for saying we're not going to get a fair shake. So we have to basically, but it's a very unconservative response to burn down the house, right? It's a radical. It's not a conservative solution. It's a radical solution. It's a revolutionary.
When Trump gave his first joint address to Congress,
that's when he became president.
Right. Well, that was Van Jones who said that. Van Jones, the very liberal CNN pundit, who said this is the moment where Donald Trump became president, and almost all the punditry was, wow, he really read that teleprompter. Wow, there was some real emotional moments there. I mean, the thing that Van Jones was talking about when he was talking about the widow of the man who was killed in the Yemen operation. This was an enormously controversial Yemen operation, where there are still serious questions how that operation was approved by Trump, and one emotional moment on TV, and all the pundit class doesn't even share the underlying story of that operation and the controversy that was roiling around it, because it was a nice TV moment. So it's not like the media is incapable of giving Trump credit for performance.
That's true. I think there needs to be a distinction. How do I put this? Half the people, my sense is that half the people who are critical of Trump, or maybe more than half, are not critical of him because he's uniquely bad, which I think he is. They would be saying the same damn thing, not to sound like, a Democrat dropping my dirty language, but they would be saying the same thing if he was Marco Rubio or for Scott Walker. That's my sense.
I mean, we had liberal media, mostly Chris Matthews, remember, was over the moon when George Bush came flying in wearing his, fighter pilot jacket, landing on the aircraft carrier. I mean, there's a lot of quote unquote liberal media that's very easily awed by imagery. And I think a lot of liberal media, again, using the term extremely loosely, is quick to look for opportunities.
Right. Well, no, actually,
look at me. I'm being fair and objective here.
That's one of my criticisms. This is actually an interesting point. I think that's one of my criticisms of Trump is that, look, you need to accept that the media does tend to have a liberal worldview, but you can still win. Reagan managed to become the great communicator, even in a hostile environment where there was a liberal media monopoly. This is before Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all that. Reagan did the work, right? And he got some great press. And I've always argued Trump, that's what Trump should do. He could just, if you say things a little differently, if you don't step on your stories, if you don't do the tweeting, you could advance some of your policies, some of which are fine, some of which are bad. But that's been my criticism. But here's the point. Trump embraces this paradigm that says we should no longer exist in that paradigm. We should not accept the premise that the mainstream media gets to dictate the terms of what is appropriate and inappropriate. And so he is essentially trying to tear down the whole thing, burn the house down. Well, so Reagan was conservative and pushing the country toward conservatism within a sort of agreed upon consensus worldview. Trump is saying, I utterly reject that. We're going to destroy that. And that includes destroying the media and tearing that down. I think that's an incredibly radical and dangerous thing to do, to attempt to do.
Well, consider that, like Reagan, Trump could easily charm the media.
Yes.
If he wanted to.
Yes.
I mean, in the campaign, you had me saying, wow, Trump is so accessible. Hillary, she never does press conferences. Say what you want about Trump. He's so accessible. He loves talking to the media, and the media loves talking back to him. And if Trump wanted to have more cozy chats, off-the-record sessions, strokes and egos, he could. He knows how that game is played, and he could play it. He chooses not to. He is making a deliberate choice to use the media as a foil, as the opposition party, as an enemy. I mean, he's used all those words because he is advancing, as you say, a very destructive worldview. So that is, we should understand why he's doing it. But
the thing is, the thing that I find interesting is that I think there are good, decent, not crazy conservatives who disagree with Trump on a whole bunch of stuff, but actually love this project. They believe that this is a very healthy project because the media is, corrupt and liberal and whatever. And that's where I have a huge difference of opinion with them. Because, the consequences of destroying the press, the potential ramifications of that are so, immense.
Well, that's a cheery note to end on.
Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Anything else you need to add or anything you want to promote before we go?
Pre-order Carl Cannon's book. What's
on
it called?
This date.
And I did a book review and a podcast with a book review of and a podcast with Henry Olson, author of Working Class Republican, about Ronald Reagan. And it's a pretty provocative he argues that mainstream conservatives get Reagan wrong, or at least don't tell the whole story about Reagan. That is much more kind of populist, blue collar, nationalist, in some ways more Trumpian, without some of the more sort of negative aspects of that term. But then we give him credit for, and I think it's a really interesting book. So check out that book review at the Daily Beast and my podcast, Matt Lewis in the News, with Henry Olsen.
And I believe we talked about it on last week's show, but check out my Real Clear Politics column. Democrats, beware the single-payer siren, which is annoying single-payer advocates all over America as we speak.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Check us out at DMZ Show on Twitter. And we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.